Hello, statistics students. Here's another video on associations and categorical variables, intuition about independence. Sometimes you can use your intuition to make an educated guess about whether two events are independent. For example, flip a coin twice. You should know that the probability that the second flip is heads is a half. There's always a 50-50 chance you can get heads or tails. There's a 1 out of 2 chance that you'll get heads. But what if you know that the first flip was also a head? What we would need to know then is the probability that the second flip is heads, knowing that the first flip was heads. Intuitively, we know that the coin always has a 50% chance of coming up heads. The coin doesn't know what happened earlier. Thus, by our intuition, the probability that the second is heads, second flip is heads, given that the first flip is heads, is still going to be equal to 1/2, which is equal to the probability that the second is heads. And so we've just shown that these two events, the second flip comes up heads and the first flip comes up heads, are independent of each other. The coin doesn't know what happened the first time, so the probability still stays the same. The point of this exercise that we're going to be doing now is, although you can sometimes feel very confident in your intuition, you should check your intuition with data whenever possible. And the scenario that I just placed up there is a common misconception amongst gamblers. They'll see, say, maybe that this has come up heads 5 times in a row, which is possible. They think, oh, there's got to be a higher chance that the next one's going to be tails because it's got to end up tails. But again, the coin doesn't know what just happened. There's still a 50-50 chance every time. So let's look at an example here. Education and widows. Suppose we select a person at random from the sample of people asked about education and marital status in table 5.3. Is the event person selected has high school education independent from the event person selected is widowed? Intuitively, we would think that knowing that they're widowed would have no bearing on their level of education. Why would a person's educational level affect whether his or her spouse dies first? So check using the data in this table whether the two events are independent of each other. So remember, to check independence, we always check that the probability of event A given that B occurs is equal to the probability of A. We want to say that knowing B doesn't change the probability that A occurs. It doesn't matter which one we call A and which one we call B, so let's check to see whether putting A as the person selected has high school education and B person is widowed. So we would want to check if the probability that the person selected has a high school education, given that the person is widowed, is the same as the probability that the person has a high school education. So looking at the first one, the probability that they have a high school education, given that they're widowed, we see there's only 61 widows. And of those widows, 30 of them have the high school education. 30 out of 61. And if we divide that using a calculator, we get 0.492. So that's the probability that they have a high school education given that they're widowed. Now, again, our intuition tells us that these two should not be associated with each other. They should have no bearing on each other. But when we look at the probability that they have a high school education, we see that 397 out of the 665 is the probability that they have a high school education. So using a calculator on that one to estimate what that probability is, 0.597. Okay, these two probabilities are not equal. So our conclusion is that these are not independent. These are not independent means these are associated events. So if we know that this person's widowed, then the person is less likely to have a high school education than he or she would if you knew nothing about his or her marital status. Our intuition was wrong here, at least as far as these data are concerned. It is possible, of course, that these data are not representative of the population as a whole, or that our conclusion of association is incorrect because of chance variation in the people sampled. But according to these data, these events are associated. This concludes the video about associations and categorical variables, intuition about independence.